What's up, everybody? This is Raskas with a quick video on standards-based grading in AP Physics 1 using your Unit 1 test as a case study. So if you want to know the meaning of all those numbers on the Unit 1 test, don't freak out. Just stay tuned, you'll understand. A quick excerpt from an email you already got saying what standards-based grading is. Basically, it's a better grading system. Pause the video and read this if you need to, but it's also in the email. Why we're doing it? It's better because it's supposed to be transparent by giving you more information about what you need to do to improve. It's also supposed to be healthier for you by encouraging a focus on the learning, which is your real objective in school, rather than on the grades or the points, right? Which is unhealthy to be focusing on. How we're doing it or how it's done is by specifying learning goals for a course, creating assessments with these goals in mind, and then reporting the performance by learning goal. And what that means is that you're going to get tests with more than one grade on it. And it's supposed to be more helpful because then it specifies, where you need to focus your efforts and where you've done well. So in the science department at Chadwick, our learning goals are these big categories of science literacy, doing science, and skills of a student. These kind of relate to tests and quizzes in science literacy, labs in doing science, studentship or skills for a student is something by itself, but not exactly in that scientific literacy is the content, and I can assess the content in a test or quiz. I can also assess your mastery of the content in a lab or in a project. Additionally, I can assess doing science. While it'll typically be assessed in a lab, I can also assess your doing science skills, for example, your ability to plan a method to investigate a question. I can assess that in an exam, and the AP exam actually does have at least one question devoted to science skills or doing science. However, in this first test, I only had science literacy assessed. So my science literacy is further refined by topics as well as according to the skills of conceptual understanding versus calculation. Let's look at the Unit 1 test now. So there were two topic areas, kinematics and dynamics, and the skills of conceptual understanding and quantitative reasoning, aka calculations, were assessed in each of these topic areas. And so this is what your results look like. Some sample results. Now here I have the letter grades. I have 5 students. I got 2 B minuses, 2 B pluses, and an A minus. My question is, how much information does that tell you? Not much. Now look at the breakdown according to SBG. Look at how much more information you get here. Well, a lot of information, but let's make sure we can understand it. So, taking the good kinematic student. Oh, in fact, let's look at the 2 B minus students in the middle here. They have a similar story to tell. Each of these students did pretty well in the kinematics concepts, in the dynamics concepts, but poorly in the calculations in each of these topic areas. So when I analyze it according to conceptual versus quantitative reasoning, I see that they both have a pretty good level of proficiency in conceptual, but they are at the developing or beginning level in calculations. Now, kinematics versus dynamics, there's not much difference. So this gives you useful information because it tells me that these students, they did pretty well in concepts in each unit, but their issue is the math. Let's look at the B plus students. We have 2 B plus students. Let's see if, so they have the same score. Let's see if the breakdown is the same. In the one at the top, this student got a perfect score across the whole of kinematics and then did terribly in dynamics. So analyzed by conceptual versus calculation, there's no difference. This is very different to our B minus students, in which case the area to work on was clearly the math. In this case, the student is fine in concepts, fine in math. Their problem was they did not master the unit on dynamics. That tells me an interesting story because dynamics was covered after. So this implies that if they get enough time, like they did with kinematics, they can probably master dynamics as well. So I'm not worried about the student. That B plus is fine. The B plus at the bottom, this has a very interesting story. Here they did better in the conceptual understanding in both cases, in both units, and poorly in the kinematics, in the calculations in both units. But also consistently, they performed better in each area in dynamics versus kinematics. So here we see a clear difference in concept versus calculation, as well as kinematics versus dynamics. So this student needs to work on their math, but they also need to review the topic of kinematics better. Our A minus student mastered kinematics, didn't do as well in dynamics, but had a clear discrepancy in concepts versus calculations. They did better in the calculations and poor in the concepts. So this is telling me that this student is overall a good student and pretty strong in math, but needs to work on their conceptual understanding. So a lot of different information. And you can see students can get the same letter grade by many different paths. Also, this SVG framework gives you a lot, clearly identifies what you need to work on, but it also identifies where you did well. Each of these students, except for one, 4 out of these 5 students had one or more areas in which they scored a perfect 4.0. So if you feel like I really thought I understood this topic, I'm disappointed because I got a B minus, well, this here validates both of those. It validates the feeling of pride in feeling you mastered it. You mastered something for sure. The student mastered the concepts of dynamics, but they need to work on their math. And so they can be disappointed, but they also have some validation, something to be proud of. And so this is where the motivation comes in, all right? Because now they know what they need to work on to excel. Now, one final dimension to look at this in. I, for this test, also graded according to an AP scale, assigning you grades of 1 through 5 and using the AP rubric because these were all AP questions. All right. Now the main difference is that the multiple choice is either right or wrong in AP, but in my SVG system, I asked you to show reasoning, and depending on your reasoning, I gave you a 1 through 4 grade on that. And depending on the difficulty of the question, some of these questions I combined together to average it. Some of the questions that were more difficult were like a standalone part of a question. Now, main point is this. When I compare my overall final grades of students versus what they would have gotten according to the AP scale, the student with B minuses, the student with an A minus would get a 5, a low 5, but a 5 in either case. So an A minus, I think, is justified. Student with a B plus got either between a 4 and a 5 or a solid 4. Again, B plus being a 4, that's justified. The students with B minuses were between a 2 and a 3. Now, a 3 would probably convert to a C. So how did they get a B minus? Again, it's because I gave you credit. Even if you got an answer wrong in the multiple choice, the AP does not. So I think that my system is fairer at acknowledging what you have learned, and that's why you may get a you may get a B minus here, whereas you might have gotten a 3, which is more like a C in the AP exam. One last thing, the student with the A minus would have gotten a 5 on the AP, but would have gotten that 5 with a percentage of either 74 or 72%. Now, 74, 72% on the Chadwick scale is a C minus, all right? So, or a C. And you'd be crying if you got that grade, as I said. But I don't think you'd cry if you got a 5 on the AP. So again, what SPG allows us to do, in addition to giving you more detailed and useful feedback, it also allows me to assess you at a higher level of difficulty and still give an accurate representation of your level of mastery. So I hope that is useful. I hope you understand what you got in that Unit 1 test by now. Just so you know, there are other aspects of standards-based grading. I'm not going to get into it right now, though, but learning targets could be more specific. Um, you could get multiple opportunities to show mastery on each learning goal. Retest, variety and assessment types, there are question marks there for a reason because I'm not sure if I'll actually do that or if that'll be done at Chadwick. But these are other aspects of SPG. Um, but at least with what we're doing right now, I hope you appreciate it and you understand it and find it helpful. That's it for now, folks. See you around.